Hi, welcome to the second chapter of the illegal arm trafficking from the United States to Mexico, the flows, the impact, and the countermeasures. As introduction, I want to say that illegal arms trafficking from the United States to Mexico has become a critical security concern from both nations. The flow of U.S. sources firearms, often called the Iron River, has armed Mexican drug cartels and fueled extreme levels of violence. Over 200,000 firearms are estimated to be smuggled from the United States into Mexico each year. So, this contributes to an escalating homicide rates and empowering criminal organizations. In Mexico, gun laws are extremely strict. There is only one legal gun store in the country that is run by the military. So cartels rely on smuggled weapons to outgun rebels and authorities. In this chapter, we examine the smuggling routes and the tactics that move firearms to the legal frameworks and the enforcement efforts on both sides of the border. Notable cases like Operation Fast and Furious and the role of the US gun dealers and how the influx of weapons has bolstered cartel power and violence in Mexico. So the scale of trafficking and the types of firearms of this situation is that the vast majority of guns used in Mexican crimes originated in the United States. Between 16.8% and 17% of the firearms recovered at the Mexican crime scenes are tracked back to the US. Um, they are tracked they are traced back to the US manufacturers or importers. The Mexican authorities have estimated that roughly 200,000 and 250,000 firearms are illegally transported from the US to Mexico annually. That's an immense volume sustaining what activists dubbed as an iron river. From 2015 to 2022, the US Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives tracked 133,000 firearms recovered in Mexico and traced them to the US sources. Though this is likely undercounts the total flow, Mexico now accounts for about 59% of all in the international crime gun trace requests, underscoring its position as the primary destination of the trafficked US guns. So the types of firearms that are trafficked skew toward military-style weapons that give cartels formidable firepower, while handguns like pistols or revolvers are numerically the most common guns recovered. Mexican officials report that over 80% of guns used in homicides are high-caliber long guns, including semi-automatic assault rifles and even .50 caliber sniper rifles. In one analysis, 66,000 crime guns confiscated by the Mexican military, more than 12,000 were identified as assault weapons, like AR-15 or AK-47 variants. The expiration of the U.S. federal assault weapons ban in 2004 corresponded with a significant uptick of violent deaths in Mexico. A study in that the American Political Science Review found that the end of the ban led to the hundreds more gun murders in North Mexico, independent of the cartel activity. So the cartels price high power rifles. For example, Mexico recovered over 700 barrel .5 caliber sniper rifles from 2015 to 2022 and says 100 more in a single year. These .50 caliber rifles legally sold by the US manufacturers like Barrett. can pierce an engine, blocks, and even down aircraft, as tragically demonstrated in 2015 when the Jalisco New Generation cartel shot down a Mexican military helicopter using a truck mounted of a .5 caliber Rowan machine gun. That machine gun was later traced to a legal purchase in Oregon, and a barrel .50 rifle used in the ambush was traced to a gun shop sale in Texas. These examples highlights how US civilians market supplies military grade hardware and the ends of the wildly by criminal groups in Mexico. So we have here a table of the top of the US sources dates of the guns traced from 2017 to 2021 from USA to Mexico. So we have the information of the source states for guns traced from Mexico to 2017 to 2021. So Texas has the 43% of this share of trace gun from Mexico, from United States to Mexico. So Arizona has the 17%, California has a 13%, New Mexico has a 3%, and Florida has a 2%. And the other states in together has the 22%. As shown, border states are the predominant sources of trafficked firearms. Texas alone accounts for roughly 40% of the US sourced crime guns in Mexico. Arizona and California together contribute to another 50%, followed by New Mexico, and surprisingly, Florida. In total, about 79% of the guns traced from Mexican crimes were originally sold by dealers in just 5 states. This reflects both proximity and the dense concentration of guns dealers in those states. For instance, new data released in 2024 show that 52,000 guns recovered in Mexico were traced to the US purchases, and over 40% of those originated in Texas. So, notably, sources are not limited to the border regions. Gun traffic to Mexico has been traced back to purchase in virtually every US state and nearly every zip code, illustrating how cartels can tap a nationwide gun market. So, the mix of weapons trafficked has also evolved. According to the ATF data, handguns or pistols still made up about 50% of the firearms recovered in Mexico in the recent years, but rifles have surged to 33% more than the double of the proportion of the rifles seen in the US domestic crime guns. So, high capacity semi auto rifles are clearly favored by cartels for their firepower. Mexican authorities also report an uptick in privately made firearms or ghost guns with no serial number appearing in cartel arsenals. So these homemade or 3D printed guns can be acquired without background checks, presenting a new enforcement challenge. So So, in short, Mexico is a wedge in US firearms from handguns to assault weapons, which has profoundly amplified the scale and the lethality of cartel relay violence. So, traffickers move guns from the US into Mexico through well trodden routes that often mirror drug smuggling corridors, but typically in the reverse direction. The U.S. Justice Department National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment confirms that the main pipelines for guns lead from the four border states into Mexico's northern region. The dominant route in recent years has been from Arizona into Sonora, along which over 1,600 firearms linking to high profile crimes were traced. Major routes also connect Texas and Tamaulipas, so Texas and Nuevo León, Texas to Chihuahua, and even Texas to Guanajuato in central Mexico. Essentially, guns purchased in cities like Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, Tucson, San Diego, and elsewhere are trafficked across border crossings into corresponding Mexican states like Sonora, Baja California, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas, etc. So, for example, a single sporting goods store in El Paso, just across from Ciudad Juarez, sold at least 33 firearms later recovered in Mexico within a 2 years span. So, border cities such as McAllen, Laredo, Bronzeville in Texas, and Tucson in Arizona are the key staging points where straw buyers acquire guns and pass them to smugglers headed to the south. I'm sorry. So, smuggling operation often use a method known as an trafficking, moving small quantities of guns in many separate trips to avoid detection. Rather than large arms shipments, traffickers typically send a few weapons at a time, carried by individual mules or hidden in private vehicles. US law enforcement data indicates that the majority of cross border gun seizures involve fewer than five firearms at a time, consistent with the ANT tactic. By dividing shipments and utilizing multiple carriers. So in another part, traffickers minimize the risk that any single interdiction will disrupt the overall flow. Common concealment methods include hiding disassembled guns inside a vehicle compartments like doors, seats, even spare tires, or among legitimate cargo. In one Texas case, conspirators broke down rifles and handguns and stuffed their parts inside the tires and engine compartments to smuggle over 100 guns into Mexico. So others have mailed guns part or used package delivery service to send components that can be reassembled in Mexico. In some instances, traffickers simply walk or drive across official ports of entry with guns staged in luggage, confident that the southbound inspection are relatively cursory. So historically, U.S. outbound trafficker checks were far less rigorous than inbound checks for drugs.